All right, welcome. And I'm really glad that we have a good group of people here. So we're sitting at 60 right now, and this will be a good showing, but we have 5 of us presenting today on Voices from Aligned Communities. And I'm speaking on 2 communities I'm not part of, but therefore the questions can be a little more surface level of, I know about their website and I know a little bit on who to contact, but not much detail beyond that. So I'll just dive right on in. And so first you'll hear from me, and I'll talk a little bit about what's going on with our website. We've got lots of updates recently. And then I'll also mention a little bit about organizations you may or may not know about, and those are COGR and FDP. After that, we'll chat a little bit about the CMMC AAC, which is the Academic Advisory Council. We'll learn a little bit more on the Association of Export Control Officers. We're going to hear what's going on in the EDUCAUSE 800-171 community group. And we'll also hear what CASC is up to, and that's the Coalition of Academic Scientific Computing, Coalition 4. So packed agenda, and Eric has been putting in the chat. We will stay completely in the Google Doc for questions, as well as, hey, this sounds great, love to hear more about this. So just generally looking for keeping that as our chat. We'll put that into the notes, and then we'll put them online with this video. So first up, on the RCOP website, I've started adding a whole lot of different resources from around, well, other partners. So for example, Trusted CI had a whole lot of times that they've talked about relevant topics to us. And I've linked out to those. And there's a few other groups that we've heard from. So I have a whole page dedicated to the higher ed presentations. Another big one that I've recently found is some of the federal sponsors are now hosting the information that we're looking for too. So for example, the Blue Cyber Initiative has pushed out a lot of really quality videos recently. And so I've been linking to those and the resources you might need there. What I like about bringing it into our site is you're able to do a decent search and still collect all of that information that is at least trusted or vetted right at your fingertips. The advocating for our voice, I also put in a page for that. You'll often see COGR or FDP making letters to, maybe it's the CMMC AB, maybe it's letters to various associations or government areas that they're speaking on behalf of topics that we're interested in, whether it's NISPOM 33, CMMC, HIPAA. I've seen all of that. Oh, whoops, one back. One big one that I'm working on right now that's still a bit in progress, it's about halfway through, is the grant that we were on with Purdue University. It was building the CUI end-to-end framework. That grant is coming to a close. And so a lot of the resources that we built that were at least primarily for Purdue at that time, we're bringing them onto the RCOP site. And one of the biggest ones at this moment is the brain dump from my risk analyst who pretty much wrote end-to-end all the things that he needed to care about when building the program. And so I have the link in there. That's but it's also on the menu too. You're hugely useful resource in that setting. They're also coming soon where we have some templates as well as some of the workflow visualized. And I guess I'll also offer this as an option if any of you are looking for longer term homes or is publicly accessible type of information. I'm happy to bring this into this site and share it out with the community, because there's a lot of things that we've each developed in-house that can help. So I see I'm running tight on time. I will also then go quickly. Tools and templates, cool. Next month, it's HIPAA focused. So HIPAA and biomedical we'll be back to hearing from Anurag, and we'll hear the entire journey, as well as we'll hear from HITRUST. COGR, in case you haven't heard of them, they are the group of people, most likely they are attached to the contract side of the house. They are research administration, and they are the ones advocating for what our interests and our needs are. And they will often do big papers and letters that are public. So they have a lot of great resources on their site. There's some webinars, there's their letters. And then the reason I couldn't get someone from them to present today was because, well, their big meeting starts tomorrow in DC. So today is a travel day for nearly everyone. And the same applies with FDP, so Federal Demonstration Partnership. And this one essentially is the group that is trying to make working with the federal government easier. They bring up concepts, for example, of this would be a great way to streamline funding sources or how to deal with these allocations. So they work directly with the federal partners. And so there's federal partners, research administration, and faculty, all part of this group. And I recently learned about them, and it was really exciting to know that here is another group of yet an aligned community. There you go. I like Jarrett, your comment there. That's great. And with that, I will continue on with Mike Korn introducing the AAC.
Thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate the invite to give everyone an update on this. I don't need to give everyone background on CMMC here or what's going on. It is safe to say we're all aware, though, of the, I'd say, disconnect between CMMC and how it envisions security working and how universities actually work. So for the last year, a group of us have been working with the CMMC accreditation body to try to bridge that. And essentially, a group of us were able to work with their CEO to have established an academic advisory council. You can go up to, Carolyn's provided the link down there at the bottom. And we've been sort of holding back on talking about this. They just rebranded themselves. Instead of CMMC AB, they're now Cyber AB. And so the website's been updated, and they actually have the advisory groups up there right now. But our main mission is to really focus on helping them understand what's different about higher ed, use them as a platform to talk to the DoD about what's different about higher ed. And ultimately, the goal is to try to help them tailor either the standards or the assessment methodology to better meet our environments without basically disrupting scientific workflow. Carolyn, you go on to the next slide, just so everyone can see who's involved with this. If you know any of these people, I strongly suggest reaching out, saying hi. By all means, I'm happy to talk to anyone directly about this. The number one thing that we're starting with as a group is enumerating the a specific set of use cases that illustrate the problems higher ed faces in implementing the CMMC standard. And we've started that really around a few canonical examples. You've probably heard me talk about San Diego has a fleet of ships. So we're sitting around wondering, okay, an assessor is going to show up. How do they assess what's taking place on the ships? Are they going to be happy by looking at log data? Are they going to want to fly out to a ship and inspect the CUI labeling on storage? We really don't know. And the standard's mute on this. And many of you, Ryan gave me the example Monday of wind tunnels. You know, these large pieces of equipment that are used for both CUI and non-CUI work. And it's kind of difficult to imagine how we're going to fold them into the existing CMMC spec. So that's sort of what we're starting to tackle. All of you can imagine issues around collaboration across institutional boundaries, field work, the fact that students come to your university so they can do research in labs. So what does it mean to have students that are maybe from foreign countries in a lab doing CMMC work? The lab is doing CMMC work, but the student isn't. How do we handle those use cases? So that's really what we're focusing on initially. And like I say, I hope what that does is lead to some presentations with the DoD. The CMMC, or I should now say cyber AB, is they don't control the standards. They really only slightly control the assessment methodology. They're really downstream from the DoD. So making sure we get our challenges to the DoD is going to be key. But it's all live now. We can talk about it. And I guess I'll pause, Carolyn, see if there's any questions anyone has about this.
I don't see any in the chat. If anyone wants to raise their hand, we'll take one or two.
Ryan did ask the question of whether we're looking for volunteers. At this point, we're not. We're fleshed out in terms of the AAC. We will be creating working groups as we progress. And at that point, this is a likely community we'll come back to for volunteers for working groups.
I guess, how would you like to hear from us would be one of my questions.
Well, I think the main thing is try to connect to whomever on the AAC is your closest contact. It can be me, it can be anyone who's on here, and have conversations specifically around where CMMC is giving you grief. Is it around allowable costs? Is it around collaboration? Are there specific examples that we can give the DoD to say, look, this is a problem for us? You know, one of the other examples we've run into is chip manufacturing. We have some very expensive equipment on campus that manufactures 10 or 15 different types of chips at the same time. One of those has a CUI clause associated with it. We can't turn that machine off and run one set of chips through it. So that's just the kind of specificity that will be very helpful when we're talking to the DoD. So reach out, right? Oh, I see Jarrett's got his hand up. Go ahead, Jarrett.
Hi, Mike. I just wanted to go back over briefly. You mentioned the attempt to meet with the DoD to talk about some of these issues soon. How is the AB facilitating that channel of communications?
Well, they meet obviously regularly with the DoD, and so they're going to leverage the vehicles they've got. They have warned us though that part of the challenge right now is that the DoD is in the middle of finalizing the rulemaking around CMMC, which limits who they can meet with and what they can say. And at the same time, we may need to use organizations like AAU, EDUCAUSE, the REN as sort of the organizing principle behind the meetings. The DoD can't just casually apparently meet with a group of concerned citizens about this kind of thing. So we need to leverage these larger organizations that carry more weight as well. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, and I think it ties back to what Carolyn was saying about COGR earlier, in that COGR has been a very significant partner for us in engaging with both the AB and the DoD through the CMMC process. So it's part of the ecosystem that we have to leverage, as you say.
Yeah, and the way I look at it is that we need to tailor who we organize around based on the problem we're dealing with. So if we're dealing, for example, with really in the weeds technical issues. The REN might be a perfect example because that's made up of security practitioners. But APLU, AAU, COGR, they all have different constituencies and different valence for the DoD, which we might want to use based on what the issue was. All right, Carolyn, I don't see any other questions.
Well, thank you.
No, thank you.
And next, we are hearing from Sarah Schlagter. And sorry.
That's okay.
On the AU Echo.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Carolyn. Yeah, my name is Sarah Schlachter, and I'm from Cornell University. I'm the Export Control and Compliance Officer, and I'm also the Director of Research Integrity. But for today's purposes, I'm the AU Echo Outreach Chair. So we can go to the next slide. So the AU Echo board this year, that's us right there. You see we have a chair, a vice chair, a past chair, a secretary, membership chair, and then myself. And there's normally a treasurer, but a little bit of controversy around that this year. So no treasurer this year, but hopefully next year. Next slide, please. All right, so AU Echo, the Association of University Export Control Officers, is actually a really large organization. We have members from all over the country. In fact, we were formed in 2008 with 17 individuals representing 17 institutions, but we have grown. So this year we have, our membership includes over 415 export control professionals with compliance responsibilities at 239 institutions within the United States. So like I said, we're a huge organization, and we collaborate with the government and with other higher education partners. We submit comment letters. We have a pretty strong online presence, and frankly, just word of mouth allows us to recruit individuals in their field who are working in the export and export control space. So we can go to the next slide. So one of the big things we do every year, and we were happy to start up again this year after a little break for the pandemic, is we have a fairly large conference every year. And this year we were at the University of Pennsylvania and in May, and we were in person, and that was great. And we had a couple hundred attendees from all over the United States. And again, well, I should say, and we had someone from the European Union. So we actually allow anyone to attend the conference. You don't have to be a member to attend the conference. Next slide. So what do we do? This is just some of the areas that you can find us in. So we have a very, very active listserv, which is what most of us think is the most beneficial resource of this organization. So it's really a safe space for our members to communicate about different things that they are addressing in their individual institutions. And, you know, for new and emerging regulations as they come out, we all kind of post to the listserv. I'd say there's at least one listserv question a day, and some days there are multiple. We have a Facebook page, we have a LinkedIn page, we do a fair amount of webinars throughout the year. We do a lot of government engagement. We have government officials come and do webinars for us. As I mentioned, we do comment letters. We have roundtables, which are just informal discussions, not akin to like a formal webinar. We do member surveys, and we do a workshop every year for our members. Next slide. So these are just some of the webinars we did this year. And again, these are just for our members, but we did risk assessment. We did a U.S. commercial services panel. We have a town hall. We actually did something with the Swedish Export Control Society this year, where we just talked about what it's like to be an export control officer in the United States. So that was pretty neat. We had folks from the Bureau of Industry and Security Enforcement Division present to our group this year. We also had the Bureau of Industry and Security itself present to us on software export compliance issues. And again, these are all webinars. So we had a lot of government officials at our conference, but this is just webinars we do throughout the year. Next slide. And then, like I said, we have a workshop, and this is a pretty in-depth workshop around export control compliance. And what it is it's 5 weeks, and we just do a 1 day a week. So we did Wednesday afternoons for 3 or 4 hours every week for 5 weeks. And it covered export control basics was the first session, but then we went on to some more advanced topics, things like sanctions and classification, biologicals, shipping, voluntary self-disclosures, all that good stuff. And again, this is only open to our membership, but that's a huge, I think we had 170 attendees at the workshop, which is pretty good for a membership of 400. So next slide. And then, like I said, we have roundtables, and is the outreach chair. My role is actually I'm the one who organizes this stuff. So I usually send out stuff to the members and I say, hey, if you have anything that you want to talk about, let's do a roundtable, and anyone can facilitate it. And we limit participation to 25 to 30 people so we can keep it kind of informal. But what somebody will say is, oh, I kind of, want to talk about shipping biological materials. And we'll say, okay, great. You don't have to be an expert to facilitate it. You just need to get 25 people who kind of want to talk about that. And those are hugely popular. They usually fill up sometimes within an hour of me sending out the notification to the group. So these are just some of the ones we did this year. People are interested in how to become a cleared facility. That was really popular. People with less than 3 years experience. And then of course, a lot of international shipping and logistics. That was huge. Those are the ones that filled up really quickly. Next slide. And then comment letters. We think that advocacy is one of our key association pillars. So we've done 22 comment letters over the past 6 years, and we have been recognized for our comment letters. So we know that our peers and our fellow institutions and the government are taking our comment letters seriously. We do have regulatory authorities that reach out to us to get our thoughts on certain issues. And we encourage all our members to participate in the comment letters and or guide their own institutional responses. So there's plenty of us, especially when there's a really important issue on the table, who will submit a comment letter on behalf of our organization, but we also do an AU ECHO comment letter, and we'll get anyone, like I said, 415 members, it's not limited to anybody. So if there's a comment letter on a subject matter that somebody is particularly knowledgeable in, we definitely welcome their participation in the comment letter. Next slide. So things we have coming up in the next year. AU ECHO is going to be incorporating. So that's a big step for us, where we have not been incorporated, but we are going to incorporate. We've begun that process. So as part of that, we'll be charging membership dues. And, it's just a little legal nuance, but when we actually have a conference, we have to have an organization that is, an institution that's actually willing to host the conference and be the signatory on contracts and whatnot, and put a lot of money into it, because AU ECHO, as a previously unincorporated association, doesn't have legal authority to sign contracts or to do things like that. So incorporation is going to be a big change for us. We already have a new software program that we have committed to. So it's going to be a very interactive website where people can pay their dues, and they can go in and see all the stuff that we've done, our previous comment letters and that kind of thing. So this is going to be huge for our organization over the next year. We're hoping that we don't lose members by incorporating and charging membership dues. Right now, we don't expect those dues to be too much. So, fingers crossed. Bylaws. We do have bylaws, and we will have articles of incorporation once we incorporate. So that's a big project for myself and the other board members. And we form committees for all this stuff. We definitely will be offering our members continued remote learning opportunities. This was something that we started during the pandemic, but it's just become so popular that we're definitely not backing off of that. And then for us, the big issue right now, one of the things we are really monitoring is the evolving regulations as they pertain to Russia and Ukraine. So as some of you may or may not know, export control purview includes sanctions, US government sanctions. So when you see all this stuff in the news about posing more sanctions on Russia, all your export control officers are paying really close attention to that. And a lot of us have been spending a lot of time on our computers, furiously sending out notifications to leadership every time a new sanction is implemented that involves Russia or Ukraine. So that is something we are keeping an eye on. Mentorship program. This is something we're actually hoping to get off the ground this year for the first time. What we're looking to get is a number of more senior members volunteer to be mentors, and then we can pair them up with new members who come in, if of course, if they want a mentor. I don't know, what you guys do with different organizations around mentorship programs, but there were concerns raised about legal liability. So, like anything, we're putting together a packet where it says, mentor advice is not legal advice, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of covering ourselves there. And of course, for us, there are always lots of opportunities to volunteer and get involved. We didn't do it this year, but last year we did a food drive for one of the food kitchens in the United States, and we do different volunteer events when we can. So lots of stuff going on at AU Echo. I think that's my last slide.
I also don't see questions in the thing. Would anyone like to ask Sarah a question or two?
So how many meetings do you actually organize? You told us about this one big one, and you have the workshop that's 5 weeks.
Yeah. So the board meets every month. Then we try to get some sort of webinar content for our members out there at least once a month. So whether it's a webinar or a roundtable, and these are all, of course, voluntary. Then we have a town hall. We did a town hall in the fall, which we encourage all members to attend. And then at the conference in the spring, we have one large membership meeting, and you can dial into that too. You don't have to physically be at the conference. So I'd say we have the town hall in the fall, the membership conference in the spring, and then lots of opportunities to attend learning events in between there. So.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Yeah.
I guess one of my questions, and this is easy for everyone, is how would you like us to, as a community, to be able to help you?
Ooh, I think I was actually really interested in the previous discussion because it's, people it's nice to have this kind of collaboration. And I know Carolyn is preparing a resource document in that Google document. And I will definitely be using that because we as export control officers, and this is just an example, people come to us with CMMC questions. And fortunately for me, that is not under my purview at Cornell. I know some export control officers do have it, but I am not one of them. So it's nice to know where we can point people and what our options are, especially with schools with more limited budgets. And if you don't have the luxury of having different dedicated personnel for each of these compliance functions, it's nice to know where we can go and reach out to our peers and stuff. So I think just kind of this open dialogue and having events like this is really helpful. So.
Thank you. Nick, let's end with your question.
Thanks, Carolyn. So Sarah, great. That was really, your presentation sparked a thought in me. So one of the things I work on with the community has been impacted by export control around the UK Russia sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a while since I've been at a campus. And so I hadn't thought about suggesting to campuses to talk to their export control officer.
Yes.
I've been just suggesting to talk to their legal counsel, which I'm sure would have gotten them connected with their export control officers.
Yeah.
But what I'm wondering is, I'm getting a lot of questions around, particularly one of my cloud services is basically they're starting to block people from Iran when they weren't doing that before because of the Russia sanctions, because basically the cloud service started looking into what they should have been doing or potentially should have been doing. And so now that's impacting a lot of people that are in some of those places that they didn't realize they were going to be impacted. So I'm wondering, has there been any advocacy with the US government and how those sanctions are impacting higher education? Or could you describe a little bit?
And that's a huge issue, and definitely talk to your export control officers about this, because these services, Duo, for example, and Zoom, they have both put in IP blockers for these sanctioned countries. And frankly, they should have done that a long time ago, because we are under the sanctions not permitted to do things like offer online courses to someone located in Iran. So a Zoom IP blocker, frankly, as the export control officer, really helps us make sure that the university is staying compliant. But with that said, I mean, yes, there's absolutely, it's funny you mentioned that, because I literally just had a conversation with a faculty at my institution yesterday who does Near Eastern studies. And he said, well, why can't I talk with a colleague in Iran? Like, it seems like that would benefit US-Iran relations. And I said, yes, you are speaking to the choir. So this is something we are all very familiar with and sympathetic to, and I definitely would suggest bringing in your export control folks to those conversations, because this comes up all the time on our listserv at AU Echo. So
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, I also think that in the current atmosphere, more and more institutions that don't have the full staff of export control and security professionals and CISOs and
Yeah.
compliance officers, if there's one person, if the institution starts something, they hire one person, now that one person has to wear all these hats. So then hopefully our organization, the community of practice, RCOP, could say, oh, there are other people in UAX ECHO that could at a neighboring institution maybe that you could contact and get some advice, so you're not on your own.
that's 100%. That's why this organization is so great. That's exactly what we do for each other. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Up next, we will get to learn about the 800-171 community group by Jay Gelman.
Thank you. So I see a lot of familiar faces in here. So what I'm about to say to many of you is stuff you already know because you're a member of the community group. This is a fairly new community group from an EDUCAUSE standpoint. We spun it up a little over a year ago. And one of the things that was a driver was outside of the research field, in that the federal student aid group came down and started making noise that they too were going to be looking at 800-171 as a compliance tool. And that got a lot of people beyond just the research groups looking at things. And they got a little bit concerned. And we said, hey, can we get a community group spun up? And one of the things that's very interesting about that community group is it's widespread. So we go everywhere from research universities down to smaller colleges. And it's a very stark contrast between the haves and the have-nots. Next slide. So we started last spring. We already have over 400 members across a large number of colleges and universities. We're looking to foster the exchange of information and ideas. And so we're looking to say, how can we get the information from those that are doing things in the space already into the groups that are, back to Eric's earlier comment, this business of wearing multiple hats and things like that. And one of the things that comes up is it's not just the technical problems that these schools are facing. It's the, how do I get my leadership to understand the sea change that's in front of them? And so we're helping with that. Like I said, many of the members are involved in a number of other related efforts. Some of us are here. I think our primary communication platform, and this I think is a challenge that's out there for all of us. You know, you have something, you want to get it out. Each group has its own mailing list. I think I'm finding a lot of us are gravitating to the Slack channel that's been set up, because that's a place to go and have a relevant conversation. So I think a lot of us are making good use of that. So kudos to Carolyn for setting that one up. Next slide. Oops. So what are the key concerns that we're facing right now? I think for a lot of us, it's CMMC and we don't know what we don't know. So there's a lot of hurry up and wait, because we're waiting to see what actually comes out as finalized. Many of us, myself included, are hesitant to get our campuses to move too far against something that we don't know. So, you know, what is going to be the dispensation around vendors and things like that, where we may need a certain version of this. Hello, getting the attention of campus leadership. That's another big issue, especially for the smaller schools where they're understaffed and go, I need another person. Their leadership responds, well, if we give you one person, we're going to have to give somebody else another person. So that's a problem. Smaller schools simply don't have enough people to do all of this. Even if all the tools were free, they don't have the people to run them. And then, so that's something that we've been running into, and something that we run back up to EDUCAUSE leadership, folks like Jarrett and others, just make them aware of. These are the things that we're hearing in our meetings. Next slide. So where are we now? We spent the last two meetings, we meet monthly. The last two meetings were to take a look at CMMC level 1 and just a baseline of the 17 controls that are in there, understanding what they were about, discussion, where the concerns were, what people were doing in those spaces. June and July, we're going to focus on looking at what one might term to be problem controls in CMMC level 2. Things that those who are a little bit further along in the journey have come up against and say, this is a really tough one to deal with, and kind of crowd think the ways that you might deal with it, because the answer may be one thing in an enclave environment, but as Mike alluded to in his presentation, there are a lot of places where CUI comes into play that aren't simply in an enclave. We're about to roll out a poll. Poll is complete. I just have to put it in an email and send it out tomorrow, where we're going to get a kind of a rating from everybody who responds on the 17 controls in level 1 as to where they feel they are with that. And then try and get a measure of how many staff do you have working on security regulatory compliance. The idea there is for this poll to then be a tool that especially smaller schools or anyone can go and say, here's how we stack up against our peers in terms of addressing these issues. The other thing that this group has done that kind of came up after we spun up was looking at things that are relevant. So the National Security Presidential Memorandum 33, which addressed a broader swath of research for any university doing over $50 million of research with the government, which is quite a few folks. We're looking at what the implications of that are. Next slide. One of the things we're coming up with is a community effort of developing a toolkit and putting together information. These things will be, some of them technical, others of them will be more like talking points that you can use on your campus. So there's an overview of what 800-171 is, extremely useful for people who've never heard of it before or have only heard of it in passing. There's a very well done control evaluation spreadsheet that will allow universities to track where they are and prioritize some of the information around those efforts. There's an article that EDUCAUSE does a thing called 7 Things You Should Know About. It's kind of a series. There will be a paper in this space, 7 Things You Should Know About 800-171. It should be out sometime the end of this month or next month. The other thing is a project timeline, looking at what are the steps that you need to do to create a NIST 800-171 compliant environment. These things are highly different depending on the nature of your school. So we're not being overly prescriptive so much as trying to say, here are all the things that you need to consider, and here's how you might stage them in order to do what's needful in that space. And I think that probably brings me to the end of it. Carolyn, there's not another slide after that, is there? Nope, there's not. So I will throw it open for questions.
One of my first comments, though, is Jarrett, can you throw some of your the comments or just put them into the Google Doc so we can capture those after this meeting?
Yeah, Jay, I have a question. You mentioned the 17 controls for CMMC version 2 level 1.
Right.
Can you say something about the relationship between those and the small number of controls that are put in the federal acquisition rule for safeguarding of data?
I haven't done that crosswalk. One of the crosswalks that was done for us is somebody went through and kind of helped us earmark the ones that come out in NSPM 33. There are about 11 of those that are kind of an overlap. So all of those things, Eric, I think that one, the Department of Labor's one around things that you need to do for your benefits program, there's a lot of overlap. And so we do at some point need a better crosswalk of all of the things that the federal government is proposing, because there is a fair amount of overlaps. And so knowing that when you've done this one, you've addressed it and all of these things is useful. I'm not sure what group that's going to fall to. I think that's a little bit broader than just research. When you look at some of the things, like I said, the Department of Labor's benefits one and the federal student aid, it's a maybe more in the 800-171 compliance group. I just don't know that if we're to the point where we could address that.
Okay.
one question I do see is, how do I get involved? And with the community group as well as the survey?
So if you join the community, I tell you what, I will hold off on sending the survey until Friday morning. I think there's a link in the Google Doc for the if you're a member of EDUCAUSE first your university would have to be a member of EDUCAUSE, but if you are an EDUCAUSE member university and you have a profile, you should be able to go to the link that's in the notes there and sign up. If not, send us an email and we'll see what needs to be done, but take that as a starting point and then email me directly and I will put my email address in the notes for that section.
Any last thoughts or questions for Jay? I suppose, since I've been part of the toolkit, I'm looking forward to having that go live.
Thanks.
All right, and to round out the lots of voices from aligned communities, we will be hearing from Eric Dumrens from CASC.
Yep. So CASC stands for Coalition of Academic Scientific Computation. So next slide, please. What is CASC? So it was founded in 1989, and it's an educational nonprofit organization, which makes them legal, so they actually can sign contracts with hotels, and which there's also a membership fee, which is $4,000 in recent years, which is not very much, but it is not nothing. But currently we have 93 members, and members are institutions. They are typically universities, but they could also be other institutions that are not purely educational, but research oriented. And the vision of CASC is to create and maintain a robust, sustainable ecosystem that supports academic research, computing, and data services. It's enabled by a vibrant, diverse community of professionals. So that immediately tells you that what we're really focused on initially was high-performance computing and a lot of hardware. But as the focus has shifted over these years, because remember, CASC started in '89, so that was the day of the Cray 1 supercomputer. Then the hardware was most central. Now, most computation is done on quite commodity hardware, and what we all realize is much more complicated and expensive is the software, which we don't want to change too much because that breaks things. And the most valuable resource is people, programming professionals. Next slide, please. So what we want to do is we want to figure out several things. And one of the main goals that CASC is trying to get to after we changed our bylaws in 2021 is to become a trusted organization to talk to funding agencies and federal governments that put all kinds of rules and things in place, but also make opportunities available so that we can help them guide what kind of solicitations they should maybe think of making, because there is a need for it, and we have some talent that we want to train, and we have some talent that already exists and that can maybe work on a solution. But in order to work on that solution, they need some funding or whatever. So we want to be an active member rather than just sitting at the receiving end waiting for good things to happen. And if good things don't happen, just wait more. So we want to be an active part. Next slide, please. So who are the people that essentially are the representatives in CASC of these member institutions? So typically you have directors of computing centers, research computing facilitators, chief information officers and chief information security officers, and also research administrators. So there is some overlap with other organizations like COGR and AU ECHO, although of course not that specific. The goal of CASC is all scientific computing, not just compliance. But in particular, you have include people that do pay attention at the institutional level of cybersecurity and compliance. So many of the people that are tasked with this and that are representing their institution in CASC are also part of this community, the RCOP community. Next slide, please. So in order to realize this function or this vision and mission of being a trusted organization, we want to be more interacting with the federal government and federal agencies and also state agencies and other organizations. So the bylaws that were updated in 2020 now call for a positions committee. So the members of that committee serve a 2-year term, and the task, the charter of that committee is to write short documents that address issues of concern. Sometimes a little bit longer than their white papers or position papers about particular topics. And these topics are voted upon by discussion, typically at the fall meeting or the spring meeting, but sometimes also by email. If somebody brings up, or if something happens in the news that is all of a sudden of concern to lots of institutions, then that will be or that could lead to a position that the position paper needs to write about. And the audience for these white papers are twofold, or these papers, these position papers. One is to distribute among the members so that the people that are actively representing the institutions can use it with their own leadership, so that when I, as a director for research computing, can then go to my boss and my administration, the provost, the vice president for research, the chief information officer, and tell them, look, these are concerns that everybody has. This is how people deal with them. And we should do something similar or something that's modified that fits our institution, whatever. But these papers then provide a more concrete state of the art, so that it's not just me, Eric, saying, hey, we should do this. And the second thing is to clarify the position and figure out among many of these institutions what is common, which is then written down in the papers, so that if at some point one of the federal agencies comes out with one of these requests for information and they say, hey, we have an opening until April 30, you can, we want comments on this particular thing. Like is right now, there is an open request for information from NIST about the National Artificial Intelligence Research Resource. And so if you have a position paper that already discussed some of these issues, then the position committee is empowered by the bylaws to write a response and maybe quickly put it for a vote or reach out to some of the members or representatives from the members, but make sure that we can act quickly within the timeline imposed by, so it's to be ready and be part of that discussion. And so that's the power of this committee, that they can respond in the name of CASC. Next slide, please. So the recent papers, just to give you an example, by vote during the CASC 2021 fall meeting, which was in October, we had a sort of a working session of an hour or a couple of hours, where people were bringing up brainstorming ideas of what were issues that they felt were of prime importance to their institution. And if you remember, the fall of 21, everybody was filled with this notion of ransomware everywhere. Lots of academic institutions were being called upon and basically attacked and forced to shut down. So everybody was concerned about cybersecurity, and that paper came, or that topic became one of the top one. Another one was aligning federal funding, and then staffing was very important. And another thing is team science. Increasingly, science is getting more and more complicated, and it's not a single faculty member with a few graduate students that do most of the research. There are more and more projects that are much more engaged. And so how do you organize, and how can an institution optimize team science? And in particular, how can we optimize research computing and data services at an institution? And so we wrote a paper. I'm a member of the positions committee at this time, and we wrote a paper, 4 papers, and they were then presented to the membership at the CASC spring meeting now in April, and they all approved the papers, and we have to do some final editing, and then they will be published in July. So that's just an example of what CASC is doing, and in which way it actually interacts with this particular community, and how this community can be leveraged by CASC to make its position more clear. Because one of the things that we now do in that cybersecurity paper, we sort of outline the things that are of relevance, particularly to CASC, but we also say, by the way, there is this ARCOP organization, and they have a website, and they have all kinds of resources where different staff members can go and help. Next slide, or I think this is probably the last one, but if there is another slide, then we'll go to the next slide.
Nope, this is it.
That's it. So then questions, please.
We answered the one that came through in chat of how can I tell if my member is my institution is a member, and CASC does put those records online, and you can go see if your institution's there, and
who your representative is. Yeah.
it shows that too. Does it? No, not the public page.
Oh, okay. Okay.
How would I find that information out?
You
Well,
can send a message to me.
Then you might want to put your email in that. How do I know if my institution's a member? Thank you,
Yes.
Jim.
Yeah.
All right, I suppose to pull things all together, were there any questions that maybe weren't just for Eric or just for the rest of us, or any final thoughts? I'm curious, other groups you'd like to hear from? Was this a good use of hearing what's going on around us? All of that.
Or if you want to throw any virtual tomatoes.
That was such a quiet crew. All right.
Yeah, it is a quiet crew.
Well, thank you then, and I will turn off the recording.